Well, thank you everybody for coming today, and I'm just going to start out with kind of the inspiration for me for this topic. When I was about 14 or 15 years old, I was down at the Smithsonian down in Washington, D.C., and I saw this book, The Good Old Days That Are Terrible, and I flipped through it, and it was about the post-Civil War period up until about 1910, and it talked about how bad things really were, as far as like disease and crime, and just everything in America, because we kind of had been given this rosy kind of picture of the way the Gilded Age was. And so I got fascinated by the topic, and what they call this is a German word for it. Actually, two German words I think are just really incredible. One is Doppelganger, for somebody that's exactly like somebody else, and the other one is Schadenfreude. And Schadenfreude is basically having pleasure of viewing somebody else's misfortune. And so what we're going to do today is a lot of Schadenfreude. And I consider myself the Andy Warhol of Schadenfreude, because what I do in this book, which I'm going to be releasing later on this year, it's got about 633 references of different types of murder scandals and disasters in New Jersey. And what I'm doing in here is, this is how you pronounce it, Schadenfreude. And it's, and in completely reading the book, you will never feel the same way as the Garden State. When I grew up, I lived in Hunterdon County, and we could get both Philadelphia and New York stations. And you'd always tune in at night, and you go, oh, New York is so horrible. Oh, Philadelphia is so horrible. After you read my book, you won't think the same way, because New Jersey's got its share of things. This, of course, is the state with our 21 counties. A lot of people don't really kind of focus on all the different counties. I've been immersed in these counties lately, kind of learning everything about what goes on. And some of the counties are very populated, and some are very small populations, but I've tried to be very fair in the book to get equal opportunity for all counties. These are the categories, and each category is associated with a county. For instance, Atlantic County is railroad accidents, Bergen County is amusement park accidents, and it goes all the way through for different ones. I'm going to go through this as we go through the presentation. I'm going to go through all of these, and at the very end, oh yeah, at the very end, it's going to be one of New Jersey scandals, kind of just celebrity scandals. We've had a few of those. First off, we'll start out with Atlantic County, which is railroad accidents. As someone was mentioning before about the railroad industry, really focused very strongly in New Jersey in the beginning because of our proximity between Philadelphia and New York City. And the Camden Amboy Railroad was very important. This was a particular railroad that was going to Atlantic City, and this was a very tragic accident. One of the things that we don't realize is back in those days, they didn't have electricity and things like that to handle, and didn't have EMTs and stuff. So when you have an accident like this, where you have 42 people dead at the accident site with the train derailing, everybody had to flock out there and have torches, and the bodies were actually lined up by the side of the road, and they had to bring the survivors into Atlantic City to treat them. So it was a pretty serious accident. And in the book, I'm going to go through a whole list of different ones. The one for Middlesex County is the Broker wreck. And this was one that took place in the 1950s. And this was a serious, 80 people ended up losing their lives for this one. And it's one of the worst disasters in, as far as railroad disasters in New Jersey history. It was a very serious wreck that took place with the Pennsylvania Railroad. It's actually a book that Gordon Bond has written on this, which is very good, about the Broker. For other railroad accidents, this was one that was really scary. They had chemicals on this one down in Camden. This was and it derailed and released a lot of stuff, which was kind of scary. Amusement park accidents. One of the things that happened here is a lot of us experienced Palisades Park as we were growing up, seeing the commercials on TV of the saltwater pool, hearing the song. That Palisades Park is not the one that burned, because the one burnt right after D-Day. There was this terrible fire in the summer of 1944, where usually things in New York, people in New Jersey are watching something bad happen in New York. In this case, people in New York were looking at New Jersey, because the fire was so intense. They have 100 of the cars that were parked in the parking lot caught fire and started exploding. All of the major rides burned up. And one of the things that was really interesting was that people were in the pool. People were in the pool at the time, and they had to run out. Some of them with towels wrapped around them. Some of them, and they were wandering around the site for hours to try to come back and get their personal belongings. So it was a pretty serious fire. And then of course what happened afterwards is they rebuilt it all. And the park that we knew about was the one that was the rebuild that took place. And then eventually the site where the park is, they actually have a monument there, which is where they built high-rise apartments, up in that area, Cliffside Park. Yeah, exactly. So now, as far as amusement accidents, the only one I could find in Middlesex County, if anybody can help me out with this, because since we don't have the attractions that the shore has or other places, this was a site of a particular thing that happened at this school where children were injured. If there's any other information that people have of any fairs or any other accidents, please tell me, because I've been searching for anything in Middlesex County. I haven't really found a major thing. In this particular chapter in the book, there's a lot of stuff on the shore. There's the stuff up in North Jersey and Bergen County where there was a lot of accidents up there, because we have a lot of amusement type things in New Jersey. There was also a bunch of them that were along the Delaware River over the years that were there as well. They had fires and other types of accidents. So this chapter kind of focuses on that. As far as one of the things that amazed me when I started writing this book was how many huge fires we have. I mean, we think California or Oregon or Washington's bad. The Pineland fires destroy thousands of acres over the years. And I was out in Oregon about 2 years ago, and I experienced what the fires are like in California, where you see the smoke everywhere and you see the soot going around, and it's not a pretty sight. And this is what South Jersey deals with a lot. And a lot of these fires were ignited by accidents, through planes crashing from the Air Force Base, or through just dryness that happens through different droughts and stuff. The worst fire was in 1963. This was when the entire state was like on fire, basically. And they had, thousands of 183,000 acres burned all over. And the real tragedy took place in Burlington County, where I live. And that's where 7 people died trying to fight the fire down there. One of the things that this fire brought out, though, was they were very used to dealing with urban fires in cities, but they hadn't really dealt with forest fires much before '63. And so the fire departments kind of changed the way they did things, and they can much better handle these types of fires than they used to. Down where I live, sometimes you'll drive down through the Pine Barrens and you'll see the scorched areas. And then before you know it, a few years later, it's all grown back. So it's amazing how it rekindles itself. The one fire in Middlesex County I found was the Meadow Road fire. As you can see, 59 acres, it's kind of a small fry compared to the stuff that happens down in the Pinelands. But this was a pretty major fire for Middlesex County. There may have been other ones earlier that I'm not aware of when there was more forest. But there's not so much forest in Middlesex County. It's a much more urbanized area. As far as the serial mass killings, we have the distinction of being where it all began, which New Jersey. And it all started in Camden, and it was in 1949. And this individual was a veteran from the Battle of the Bulge. He had some grievances with people in the neighborhood, and he just went off and had this, what they called the 12-minute, walk of death. And he went through and killed 13 people in 12 minutes. And it was an awful tragedy. And this was a time when people were not used to this thing. So this was kind of just an incredible shock to the state and to the country when it happened. But little did we know this was our future. And this, another great serial killer in New Jersey, is this guy, Kuklinski, who is known as the Iceman. And Michael Shannon over there, he played him in a movie called The Iceman. And what he basically would do is he was involved with a lot of underworld kind of characters. And he would kill the people, and he would, to hide the information about their death, he would cut up their bodies and keep them in a Mr. Softy ice cream truck. Yeah, so it was pretty bad. And if you really want to get flipped out, go on YouTube and see the picture down on the left. He actually made these videos when he was in prison, and it's really pretty bad. So I was at one of these lectures recently on this presentation up in Bergen County, and a woman came up to me afterwards and said, I used to live across the street from the Iceman. He was a very nice man. He used to always bring flowers to his wife. We had no idea what was going on. So anyway, of course, we have even worse than the Iceman. We have the guy that the nurse killer killed 400 people. He killed through poisoning, IV bags and injections in different hospitals, including the hospital where I was born in Hunterdon County. And so this went on for a number of years, and then he was finally caught and imprisoned. So a very serious situation. Yep, and then this, for this area, one of the things we had in Perth Amboy, there was this guy, he was only 2 people he killed, but he was called the Perth Amboy Slasher, and a ripper. And he was a guy from back in the 1920s. He was caught, and eventually one of the things that was interesting, he killed the person, took their belongings, and then he gave them to his landlord. So they came to the house to arrest him, and she had like the rings on from the woman that he murdered and things like that. So pretty much he confessed. And then in those days, it didn't take long for the death penalty to be done. As you can see, he was captured, and within less than a year, he was executed. And then this is in Old Bridge. This was a horrible situation that happened in 2012, where this individual at Pathmark went in there, a 23-year-old ex-Marine, and shot it up and killed a 18-year-old woman and a 24-year-old in the Pathmark right there. Yeah. Yeah, so this is kind of our own kind of serious. Yeah. Oh, he did, I think it was like a grievance with the people that he worked there. Yeah. Yeah, and now plane crashes, we have a number of plane crashes, and some of the worst ones we had were back in the 1950s and 60s when aviation wasn't quite as good as it is today as far as safety, and especially around Newark Airport, there were a number of really bad crashes. This crash was actually in a show that was in 1971 down at Cape May at the Air Naval Station in Wildwood. And I was down there recently for a presentation we did on the League of Historical Societies, and there was an individual who had been involved with the organization for many years. He was a doctor. And I said, well, do you know about this particular case? Because I'm putting it in my book. And he goes, I was the doctor on call that day, and I'm actually the one that had to declare the 4 people dead who were killed. Well, what happened was they were riding in World War II planes, and they collided during the show in front of the audience. It was a horrible, horrible thing to witness. In Middlesex County, we had this Cessna crashed in 2019 into like a neighborhood in Colonia, yeah. And the pilot was killed in this, so it wasn't a serious cause of death. But anytime a plane crashes in a built-up area, it's a very scary type of thing to happen. As far as police officer deaths, one of the worst ones that happened kind of in the early days was this one with Constable Harry Buck. It was in 1902. It's down in South Jersey. This man had been attacking his wife, and so the wife had communicated to the police, and he came and arrested him. And the guy said, can I take my gun along if it's unloaded? And the guy says, sure, no problem. So he puts him into the carriage, and as they're riding in the carriage, suddenly the guy loads his gun and kills Constable Harry Buck. So then he flees into first he goes back and beats up his wife, and then he goes and starts fleeing, and a posse went after him. And supposedly they didn't find him, but his body was found floating in a pond the next day. So I think they may have found him. And so he was, but that was the early one. His name is actually on a monument down in Washington, D.C. for police officers that had died in duty. Yeah. In those days it was. Because generally, here's the really interesting thing about law enforcement in those days, because I came into this when I did my book, The Franklin Park Tragedy. Most of it was a kind of a homegrown thing within the community, where a lot of it was after thieves that would steal chickens and other things from farms. And so basically they would bring the group together and they would search out supposedly to stop the guy and bring back the stuff. But oftentimes they'd kill the people. Usually it was thieves. It was mostly thieves. Oh yeah, no, this was something, at this area, which was like over 100 years ago, all law enforcement in New Jersey, if you look into it, you would just be amazed. Like in South River, they had one police officer at that time, and he was an alcoholic that would end up passing out. Oh yeah, it was bad. Yeah. Oh, there was a character. He passed out in the police station, and these kids came in and cut off his handlebar mustache. Yeah, he was a character. Of course, the one thing that we probably remember is this was the state trooper that was killed here in East Brunswick. It was a terrible thing, and this woman from the Black Liberation Army and her group had killed him, and she was imprisoned, and then she escaped, and then just recently she passed away in Cuba, the woman who had done it. And it's one of the things with Chapter 7, which was for Essex County, I do it on disease. And one of the things I go through in the book about all the different types of diseases which have been encountered in New Jersey, from smallpox to cholera to other types of things. Of course, the Spanish influenza was the biggie, which took place. And in New Jersey, it really hit biggest in like October, November of 1918. My grandfather was actually in Fort Devens up in Massachusetts, and he actually came down with it. And the two men that were there, they had recovered, and they flipped a coin to see who was going to accompany his body back to his home of Bar Harbor. When he came out of his delirium, both men had relapsed and died, and his nurse died. And that was kind of the nature of the Spanish flu. It was a very, very dangerous.
About 1 million people died.
Yeah, oh yeah, it was real. Oh,
Yes, but medicine wasn't.
oh no.
Today that wouldn't happen.
And a lot of the people, like in World War I, there was like 117,000 U.S. troops that died. Of those, 67,000 were from Spanish flu. So it wasn't even from combat deaths. So anyway, it was pretty bad. Fort Dix was a really bad area for it. If you look down on the right-hand corner, that is a monument that's up in North Jersey to honor the dead from the camp that was up there. And that was, a lot of the people were there that were disembarking. What they would do is to be in the camp. They would come down the Hudson River to Hoboken, and Hoboken was the main spot where people would go to France from there. So the flu hit very bad. And actually the flu, if you look at it compared to COVID, was much worse than COVID as far as in New Jersey. Often the problem too that we remember back then was they didn't have a CDC or any type of way of handling things. So it was kind of very haphazard the way they dealt with it. Nope, nothing. This is a case that happened in this area, Middlesex County. If you go to the south, if you go to South River, the Frazee urn is behind the museum there in the cemetery, and that's what this is on the far right there. And what happened was, Frazee was living in New York with his family, and the cholera epidemic had hit. Okay, I'll wait. So the cholera epidemic had hit in New York, and so the family fled to South River, and they were trying to get away from it all. They went for a time up to Sandy Hook area, and she got sick there. And they came back, and she died. And this was his first wife, and so he made this monument for her. But this just shows you the danger of cholera. And cholera was very dangerous in the farm community because oftentimes the water supplies would get contaminated, and then you had a big problem with it. When we adopted my daughter from El Salvador, we went down to the town where she was from, Santa Ana, and we were driving through into the town, and there was big banners over the street that said, "Don't drink the water, cholera." So even in this era, it can still happen. Disease, again, with this was something that happened up for Middlesex County, up in the Woodbridge area. They were dumping stuff from the different waste places in New York that was ending up on the shores there. And so actually, Donald Trump's sister was the judge, and she's the one that did the case where Woodbridge Township got $1 million from New York to clean up all the waste that had happened right there. This also happened at the Jersey Shore. There was a whole bunch of waste that came in through there as well. But if you look in here, the worst month in New Jersey for COVID was about 7,000. Spanish flu was higher than that. And as far as counties go, Middlesex County was not one of the worst COVID ones. It was more like in Bergen and Essex, where they had higher numbers of deaths from COVID. Gloucester County is for motor vehicle accidents. And being in New Jersey, as I drive every day, I'm amazed that I'm not involved in one because of the way people drive. But back then, it was just as bad. And there was a terrible accident that if you've ever watched the movies like Final Destination, it was kind of like this for this particular thing, the Woodbridge pileup. There were just vehicles all over the place burning, and there was a propane truck that exploded and kind of lit cars on fire. So you have this total crazy things going where 6 people were killed, 22 vehicles all littered, kind of around exit, I guess, 3 of the turnpike around that area. No, it was just people crashing into each other. It really wasn't so much of a weather thing. It was just, it kind of happened, and it was like a chain reaction type thing. And it was pretty bad, and what's amazing is in the same spot, you have a terrible bus accident that takes place in '92, and the Angels had left New York for Yankee Stadium. They'd played there, and they were coming back to return to California or for wherever they were going for the next site. I'm not sure where their destination was. And their bus came across a piece of tire from a truck that had been left, and the guy went to avoid it, and the truck went off the turnpike. And so the manager of the Angels, Buck Rogers, was injured in it, but nobody died, fortunately. But it was a pretty serious accident. And then here is one that took place in this area. This was by exit 8A. And the dead and injured, one person was killed. So it wasn't a lot of death, but it was a big, what's that? I don't think it was that one, no, but it wasn't that one. But this was a 5-car crash, so it was pretty significant. This was big for me because this used to be my exit when I would drive to work in New Brunswick. So I can just imagine what it was like that morning, just kind of the disruption of traffic. As far as murders of like mafia, organized crime, people sit there and tell you, oh, it's such an exaggeration, The Sopranos, da, 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 da. Believe me, when I wrote this book, there were a lot of people getting knocked off. There were mafia cases. And this particular case, this was a guy that was the bodyguard for an individual that was head of the Italian family up in North Jersey. And he was killed, and his body was left in the car by the Two Guys department store in Kearney. And now it's Marshall's right now. But this individual that he worked for had actually knocked off the head of the Jewish mafia because the Jewish mafia, he had ran that during Prohibition. And then he was found in his house, his estate, hung, supposedly suicide, but he had marks on his hands. So they think he was actually knocked off. But there was lots of these cases. These mafia cases are ones where people are either killed with some kind of symbol like a fish on their lap, or they're killed in a restaurant. Also, there's an area in Brick, which was called the Cosa Nostra Cemetery, where they would take the bodies and just dump them in the woods down there. Yeah, exactly, somewhere down there. Maybe he's in Brick, who knows? Maybe he's in Brick. And organized crime here, when I talk about organized crime today, you have a lot of these gangs. And this is a particular gang that was in New Brunswick, and they were different people killing each other. And so this is kind of something that's more relative to today, since we don't have as much of the activity, through the Italian mafia. Kidnappings. I grew up in Hunterdon County. So as I grew up, all you heard about was the Lindbergh trial and the case and all that. And one of the things that's good is they're finally fixing up the Union Hotel project, so that hopefully will open very soon, which was the hotel where a lot of the media stayed during the trial. But what happened with this was you have the kidnapping of the child of Lindbergh, removed from the house. There's some that say it was an inside job because the maid not long after that killed herself, or the nanny killed herself. And then what happens after the ransom was given, a year later, I think it was a year or 2 years later, money was found given at a gas station in New York. And they were able to trace it to Hoffman, to his house. And then he had parts of things that were involved with the ladder. He had money there that was marked with the ransom. And so they brought him to trial, and it was called the trial of the century. There was a situation where they thought maybe he would be, if he had admitted to it, they would have given him life in prison, but he wouldn't admit, and so that he was given the electric chair.
The government was saying actually had something to do with killing the child?
No, the governor had a similar name. Oh. It was Governor Hoffman. Hoffman was the killer. Hoffman was the governor. Yeah.
Sorry,
in fact, my uncle, who had been the mayor of South River at the time, was Jim Armstrong. Yeah. Hoffman, the governor, called Jim up and said, what should I do? I mean, should I stay his execution? And my uncle said, give him the chair. So anyway, kidnappings here, one of the big ones we had around here, and I know there's been presentations that have been done on it, is the Van Wickle slave ring. This is a situation where New Jersey had already come into a easing of the slave rules in New Jersey, or in the early 1800s. But the Van Wickles actually swindled these people to agree to go with them down to Louisiana, and they captured them and put them into slavery into the sugar plantations down there. And so this was actually 83 people were basically were supposedly freed slaves were forced into slavery in the South. And actually, if you go to Tanner's Corner Originally, there was a house that was on that corner, and that was associated with the Van Wickle family. Back in the day, if you looked for any type of people that were of African American descent, usually in the late 1800s, they were associated with that house. For this particular kidnapping, this was in Highland Park, and this is an unusual one where there was a school there that was a African American school, and these parents had got divorced, and the child was actually at the school, and the father came and abducted the child and brought the child onto the trolley car. So this was an abduction trial that took place in Middlesex County. Eventually, the kid was okay. Because oftentimes with kidnappings, you have kind of the nefarious kidnappings that are by somebody like the one that's going on with, Shannon Guthrie's mother. And then you have ones where it's a parent kidnapping somebody, a child. Crimes against children. I have a whole chapter in here. And of course, we are the place where Megan's Law came from. Megan was from West Windsor. She had gone out to play with her friend, and she was disappeared. And so they went to look for her. And across the street, there was a house that was filled with people that had at one time been in the sex offender program in Avondale. And nobody knew about it in the community. And one of the things that came out with Megan's Law is now all communities know where the sex offenders are in their neighborhood. And I know when I lived in Millstone Township, I could search and see who in the area, was associated with that. And it was definitely a feeling, keep away from that house, So it's definitely an important thing. And the Megan's Law first came in New Jersey, and then it eventually became a national law because the parents advocated for it. So but here's where it all started in Mercer County. Also, this is something that happened in South River. There used to be the Herman Ockham handkerchief factory, and they used to have children very young, under the age of 8 years old, working there. And so what would happen is when the inspectors would come, they would hide them into barrels so that they wouldn't be able to know that they're, and as soon as they were gone, they would say, get out of the barrel. So dozens of children were involved in this type of thing. And there's a photo we have in South River of a bunch of workers, and you can see these barefooted kids along with them. So it was very prevalent. In Middlesex County also, this is in Sayreville. This is a very weird case. I mean, I've done some more research on this recently, and it's like the child disappeared. They originally thought the mother had done it. Then there was a lot of questions about it. But her story was always all over the place. And there's my conclusion in this whole thing, and she was recently freed, is that either she has extreme mental illness or she actually did it. So, I mean, you'll never know for sure, but the evidence was a little bit damning that she actually had killed her son. I mean, somebody did it though. And they found the remnants of the blanket with it, which was associated with her. Sex scandals, I don't know if Middlesex County wants the distinction of being connected with a sex scandal, but this is the one that was involved. I just wrote a book about this, about the Cordova elopement scandal. The Reverend in South River at the time for the Methodist Church he took off with a choir girl, and he was married with 3 children, and she was single. And they went on this, what they called an elopement, that was the term in those days. And then eventually they came back. She was ostracized in the town. They actually sent her to Harlem to work for the family. She reunited with the minister again. They had a second elopement. Then the family got her again, brought her back to South River, and then they had a third elopement. And so the third elopement, they took off to Washington, D.C. by train and ended up in Washington during Theodore Roosevelt's inauguration as president. They were captured down there, brought back to New Brunswick. He was tried for assault and for abandonment, and he was given a term of 4 years in prison in Trenton. And as soon as he got out of prison, and I didn't mention too, she had a baby by him while he was in prison. And so, as they said in the thing, she was a mother but no wife. I think it was something in the media or something like that. So then when he got out of prison, she then reunited with him. They took off to Flint, Michigan, created new identities and became the Smiths, and they spent the rest of their life in Flint, Michigan. He worked for a factory out there with Chevrolet. So it's kind of a fascinating story. And actually online, I found a photo of the family in Flint, which was just like the Holy Grail. I'm like, wow, it's pretty cool. But that happened in South River, and that was actually my family's church. So it was definitely kind of a crazy kind of thing. Yeah. So this now in 1916, this is the animal attacks. This was a shark attack that took place, and you don't expect shark attacks in Matawan or in Spring Lake or in Beach Haven, but we have 4 people who ended up dead from sharks in 1916. It's unbelievable. It's like the jaws of its era. And we had another weird case here in Middlesex County. This is a case where a Monroe man and his dog got attacked by a rabid skunk and with rabies. And I grew up in a rural area out in Hunterdon County, and it was always the fear of rabies. It was like, don't get the rabies, you get the shots in the stomach. It's like, so it's, yeah, so that was this thing that happened. This particular chapter, I don't really have anything for Middlesex County in here, but most of it is about people that generally have this feeling that they want to bring pets into their house and end up having like dozens and dozens of cats and dogs, and then they get arrested for animal abuse. And it happens all over the state, in all different counties. It's really pretty bad. Then you have also farming communities where people decide to have 100 sheep, and the sheep are like starving, or cows and horses aren't fed. So that's what this whole chapter is about. Morris County, political corruption. We know New Jersey has political corruption. This is a particularly weird one. It's called the old school corruption one. This is where they were trying to go around the campaign contribution laws, and they were stuffing money in coffee cups in coffee shops and like passing it on to people. And actually the mayor of Morristown, his wife got drawn into this thing and was actually got probation for it. So it's a kind of a more recent political scandal. But of course we have our other ones with our illustrious senators and congressmen over the years. This is one that was kind of weird for Middlesex County. This was a one where the Edison 8 created fake ads to try to create sympathy for the Indian and I guess Asian candidates in the area. They're trying to make it look like they were being discriminated against, and this became a big postal kind of thing. They got in trouble for it. Ocean County, being a state that's filled with lakes and with ocean front, we of course are going to have problems with drownings and other types of problems. This is the worst, I think it's considered one of the worst naval disasters in U.S. history. There's a ship where it crashed into the shoals right by Absecon, and they couldn't get the people they couldn't rescue them because it was in a bad storm. So 300 people went down. Most of them were immigrants, I think from Germany, and they had money belts on them. So they hired this contractor to come and collect the bodies and bring them into a makeshift morgue that they created. He proceeds to rob them of all the money belts, takes all the money, buries the money belts in the sand, but then after the next storm, all the money belts arise, so they figure out he's the one who did it, and he flees town. But there's a monument that here on the bottom there, that's the monument for this particular ship, the Powhatan, and what's fascinating is they put the lighthouse there, and once they did the lighthouse, it ended that whole graveyard area for ships. And it just shows the advantage of having a lighthouse. Today, the lighthouse function is handled actually by Atlantic City itself. They don't need a lighthouse anymore. They actually have the lights for their ships from the boardwalk area. That's how they provide it. So it's, and the Absecon Lighthouse, which for those that are Civil War buffs, the hero of Gettysburg was actually the guy that did the actual lighthouse. He was the one involved with that. Yeah. Water accidents in the state, we have a lot of other ones. This was the Morro Castle, which took place in Monmouth County. My dad actually, when he was a kid, he visited the ship, and what it was is it was a ship coming back from the Caribbean, and it caught fire, and a lot of individuals, 137 passengers, ended up dying on the ship. But the ship itself was off on Asbury Park, right next to where the kind of the convention hall is, and it sat there for months. And it was like a tourist attraction. So you went down to the beach and you could see the ship on there, and that's kind of what the picture is right there. And my dad actually went there and visited it. Water accidents here is in the South River area, or the East Brunswick South River area. Somebody was found, a body was found by the dump. And there was a report of body floating, and so the police came there and found the person. The thing about the South River, as I found over the years, sometimes people would kill themselves in it, and this could have been a suicide, so I'm not sure what the reason for this one was. But sometimes you find too, in a lot of this chapter, as I'm talking about swimming, you have people that think water is not dangerous, and they'll go to a lake and they'll say there'll be a lake, and they'll be there for a while, and the lifeguards go, and they're like, well, let's continue swimming here for another half hour. And then one of their friends disappear. And that's a lot of these types of accidents occur. Urban fires, being an urbanized state with a lot of different places, we have a lot of major fires. My in-laws were from Patterson, but the Patterson they knew was not the Patterson that was there when this took place, because the whole place burned. It was like 459 buildings were destroyed. The library was trashed. The thing that's amazing is it was very little life was killed. Not many people died. It was only one death, and one from fright, and then I think one other person, 2 other men were killed. So it was a miracle considering the number, the actual damage that was done. A year later, they would have a devastating flood also take place in Patterson, which was pretty bad. Urban fires here in North Brunswick. This one always amazes me when I was reading about this. This place was 50 football fields long, this warehouse, and it caught fire. This was in 2015 and burned. And it was just, it was pretty intense. I know, you think of the size of it. I mean, it's hard to imagine, but yeah. And it was just a terrible fire. So that's a pretty bad one.
That was the fire where for days there was a smell of rubber.
Oh, yep, exactly, yeah. Yep, it lingers around, yep. Well, when I was in California 2 years ago, the fire was like, I think, several hundred miles south. But yet it was so bad where we were in Oregon that my grandson was playing with a cat, and he saw this stuff on the cat, and he said, what's that? And it was cinders. They had traveled all the way up there. Salem County, I have here for earthquakes. This is probably the chapter that has the least kind of horrible things, because we're just not the most earthquake-driven state here. But we've had a few of them. This particular one, the Pennsville one, was on the larger side, 3.8, and it had a little bit of rumbling. And back in those days, chimneys weren't built too well on houses. So usually when an earthquake took place, chimneys fell down and glass broke and things like that. And that was pretty much most of what happened with this earthquake. This was one that took place in Old Bridge, which was a 3.17, which is generally what you find with most of the earthquakes in New Jersey. We've had a couple that went into the 4s, but we haven't really hit in the 5s or the 6s that are the big ones. This is the chapter on hate crimes is the chapter I'm going to do for the 18. And I wrote a book on this about the Franklin Park tragedy. And one of the things with this, what happened was there was a killing at a house where a mother and a daughter were killed, and then the 2 attackers were killed by the husband. The community overreacted and expelled all the African-American people that lived in the county at that time. They made them leave the area, and then they created kind of what they call a sundown town for a number of decades. And then this had also happened in the 1880s as well. This particular chapter in the book, I talk very much about all different types of prejudice, from against Jewish people, gypsies, Pineys, Irish, Italians, whatever it is, it's covered in here under, New Jersey has quite a collection of different things that happen. From the Pineland area, from down in the south. In fact, in 1914, the governor came out and basically said the Pineys were a bunch of lowlife inbreds and really kind of, considered them like not human. So they were kind of, so it was pretty bad. And then you have like kind of the Jackson Whites, which are up in the northern part of the states, up in, up about the Ramapo area. It's another group that's been kind of nice of that. So anyway, this is a case of this particular man, Albert Thomas Moore. In the 1920s, he was the major photographer in South River. He had a studio right on Obert Avenue, and everybody who had their picture taken, whether it was family or students, whatever, he was the photographer. For a time before that, he had actually been in New Brunswick, and he always wanted to be treated fairly. And he went to this particular Liberty Street Opera House, and they told him where he was sitting, no colored person could sit. So he was pretty much incensed by it. He took the people to court. He lost in court. But there was a case in New Jersey at a time where another woman had actually been awarded, type of, of award for this type of thing, prejudice. Storms and floods. We've had quite a bit of this in New Jersey, being that we're a coastal area, and also we have the Delaware River that floods. But some of the places, like in Sussex County, you just don't expect that they would get hit as bad because they don't really have major rivers or ocean. But in this case, for the Hurricane Diana, they really got nailed bad, and like dams broke and things, and it was just a huge deluge that came through. And it was really quite serious for them. Blizzard of '88. I know my relatives have talked about how much this hit New Jersey and how a lot of places you had snow right up to the second floor. You'd have to like step out to get out. And this particular guy, Roscoe Conklin, if you've seen the show recently called Death by Lightning, which was about Garfield and his death, Roscoe Conklin's the main villain in there. And he died during the blizzard of '88 because he wouldn't pay for a coach to drive him from one part of New York to the other, and he walked and he froze to death. So yeah, but it was pretty bad, the blizzard of '88. It was a pretty serious one. Everybody talked about it for years. It was kind of the thing, and it shut down the railroads and other things. There was also another storm, I think in the teens, where the governor of New Jersey actually got trapped on a train for like 3 days. It's pretty bad. This is another storm, of course, Superstorm Sandy. I mean, I lived in Millstone Township. We lost power for about 2 weeks. And for us, we lived in a place that we had a well and electricity from that perspective. So when we got nailed, we weren't able to use water. So it was like, it was awful. But there was a number of deaths associated with Sandy. And I know going down to the shore afterwards, just the amount of sand everywhere and just the flooding in places like Asbury Park and the mounds of debris were pretty serious. For disasters, the Humble Oil Refinery disaster was quite serious, in this particular area. And the Humble oil is something that nobody really recognizes anymore because it's been gobbled up by Exxon. But it was a pretty major oil company at the time, and 300 firefighters worked hard on it. There was an assumption that possibly this was by sabotage, but they never were able to really prove it. It was actually in Linden. I think it was further in. Yeah. It was near the turnpike. Yeah, near the turnpike. Yeah, but it was pretty serious. Yeah, so yeah, it was a pretty bad one, and but that was a pretty serious type thing. And in this particular chapter in the book, I talk about a lot of different types of industrial problems. A lot of stuff happened during World War I because the Germans would attack the factories. They would have saboteurs go in, and there were a number of cases where factories with munitions blew up during World War I. And a lot of these happened before we entered the war. This is why people like Roosevelt and others were like, we got to get into the war. The Germans are blowing up our factories. This was a particular case here. This was the Gillespie one, which is the shell loading plant in Sayreville. Yeah, this was a very serious one. Accidental ignited fire occurred here, and they killed about 100 people. Pretty serious kind of thing. And this is a lot of times, New Jersey was very active in like munitions. So a lot of times you'd have these factories blow up during the different wars, or the World War I. Yeah, it was I think over that way. Was it? Yep. Exactly, but it was pretty serious one. Oh yeah, yeah. This was a pretty big tragedy at the time. Affected 62,000 residents were upended. This was one that happened in South Amboy. This was when this was actually in 1950, and this was the piers went up and killed 31 people. It's pretty serious and very big for South Amboy. Yeah, South Amboy handled a lot of the type of munitions as well, pretty big. Warren County, I get into domestic violence, and this includes family members killing family members, boyfriends killing girlfriends, that type of thing. And this was a very tragic one. This was a family, they were hairdressers. They lived up in Warren County. They were just ready to retire from their business, and their son came in and brutally murdered them. And then he took their credit cards and went out to the casino, and they caught him at the Parks Casino, and they put him in. I think he has like enough jail time for like 2 people now because it was just such a horrendous type crime. In this area, this is an area thing that happened in South River. There was if you know where the Pershing Hotel is in South River, down off of Main Street and Reed, that used to be the Hoffman House. And what happened was there was a guy there that was a brick worker. He got injured with sarin fissure, And so he decided he'd run a hotel instead. So he ran the hotel with his wife. His hotel, or his wife, was a bit of a hussy, and she would take off around town with different men. And there's one particular guy, she's riding around in the carriage, and the husband found out about it. When she returned to the hotel, he murdered her, and then he hung himself in the hotel. Yes. Yep. Yeah, exactly right. No, we tend to wonder. They've been working on it for a long time. One of the things that was really crazy that I found out is that the Pershing Hotel was not a replacement for the Hoffman House. They actually went in there and covered the original wood. So when the Pershing burned, it was actually the actual 1800s hotel inside of it, which was really sad. But it's totally gutted inside. And they've talked about putting markets in there and different things, but I don't know if it's the zoning issues or money or what it is, but they haven't been able to get anything going. They were thinking of I think, creating a Portuguese market there, was the last I'd heard. But I just don't know why things stall so much there. I don't know if it's, a lot of it, there's a parking problem, because if you put anything in there, there's really not adequate parking in South River. Yeah, and flooding, of course. Yeah, that's the other thing. Because I know, like, I live down next to Mount Holly. And one of the beautiful things about Mount Holly, for any larger event, they have a lot of parking, because they have actually the court there. But like South River, the problem is you do anything big event, you have no parking. I mean, you have very limited choices. So yeah, but that's actually in that place right there. And again, for domestic violence, this is the suitcase killer. I mean, she was pretty bad. Kills her husband, puts his body in the suitcase, and yeah, exactly, and then mails it. Yeah, yeah, and it was pretty bad. And there's quite a number. When I went through New Jersey, it just really kind of shocked me how many of these kinds of cases there are. It's pretty scary. Yeah. And now for the celebrity scandals. I mean, this is a classic one. You always see this mugshot of Frank Sinatra. And what happened to Frank Sinatra, he was charged with adultery. And the reason why he was charged with adultery, he was having an affair with this married woman. And apparently he had promised her that he was going to marry her if she got a divorce. But then he blew her off. And then she ended up, I think, getting pregnant. And so then she charged him with adultery. And eventually the case was dismissed. But that's where that mugshot comes from. That was his original mugshot for adultery. This is a case where, as a kid, I used to watch Soupy Sales. Yeah, and what happened here was he went on New Year's Day and he told all the kids to send money into and they all sent the stuff in. And there's a lot of like urban legends that it was like $80,000. He claims, of course, it wasn't that much, but they suspended him for a while, but then they brought him back. It wasn't a long suspension.
Did he die?
Oh yeah, he's dead. Yeah. And then this was a classic one. This was the wife swap thing. This was up in Bergen County. A lot of people don't realize that it was actually a New Jersey kind of thing, because they lived in Bergen County, and they swapped each other's wives. These two Yankee pitchers, and the one couple is still together. What's that? Oh, they're Mike Kicic and Fritz Peterson. And Kicic is still with the wife that he ended up with. They ended up getting married. And of course, the next season, Steinbrenner fired both of them. He's like, I don't want scandals. None of this, not pure. Now, this was for, excuse me one second. Yeah, this was a case where this woman, she was on Melrose Place, and she ended up getting a drunk driving arrest on 206. And 2 people died, in the accident, which was, quite serious. And so she ended up, in her case, I think she was given some jail time, then she was finished with it, and then they added some more to her sentence recently. This is one of my favorite ones. I'm a big Bob Dylan fan. And Bob Dylan was actually, he decided to go looking for houses in Long Branch. And he gets over there, and of course he looks like this with his hoodie. And somebody calls up and says, some creepy homeless guy is like searching around my house. Please come arrest him. So then they get there, and he goes, I'm Bob Dylan. Obviously, he didn't buy the house after that. You got to say, so that was hilarious. This one is Bon Jovi's daughter. She had a problem with, she almost overdosed from heroin. She did overdose. And luckily, she was okay. And so since that time, both he and her have been very active in trying to fight the opiate crisis, which is very serious. In this case, the situation, my daughters were really big into watching Jersey Shore. Yeah. And he got in trouble for not paying his taxes. So he ended up having to go to jail for a while and pay some fines. And of course, you got the Bruce Springsteen DWI. He went out for a little ride on Sandy Hook, and they nailed him and gave him citations for DWI down there for consuming alcohol in a closed area. This is a case where this woman was on show, one of the shows on TV, Dawson's Creek, and All My Children. And she ended up, she was like a substitute teacher in a school, and she molested a 17-year-old student, which was, I think she was married at the time too. It's kind of very weird. And a lot of the things I find in New Jersey, I've found recently, there are a lot of cases, which is just so disturbing to me, of women teachers that molest the young high school kid, and they're married and have kids. I'm just kind of like, I don't really understand it. And so this is a summary for you. New Jersey has the first mass murder in Camden. Two biggest serial killers, Colin and Iceman. We have the Lindbergh case. We have Megan's Law. We have the shark attacks, which are, kind of, some people say inspired Jaws. We have the worst civilian maritime loss of life, the Bohacan. We have the large Palisades amusement park fire, deadly railroad accidents killing nearly, one of the things I didn't mention was there's an accident where President Grant was actually on a particular train and was nearly killed. But luckily he was in the dining cart at the time. And then there was large forest fires, thousands of acres burning in the Pinelands, and many, many organized crime murders. And that is the end. And I'd like to answer any questions. And then this is a prototype of my book that's going to be coming out probably in June, which has over 630 cases of different things in New Jersey by all these different ones I mentioned, much more detailed information. So that's coming out, Murder, Disaster, and Scandal in New Jersey. And if you're interested, my website is www.armelvis.com.